I mean, what's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team. I would be very careful about slinging stuff. Am I going to get sued? We got legal on this?
I like football season, and all the things that go with it.
12 months ago, headed by one of the worst, quote, coaching jobs in the history of the NFL, quote unquote, the Broncos were 2-4 under head coach Nathaniel Hackett and headed towards firing him and getting rid of him. This year, under the new genius Sean Payton, the Broncos are 1-5 and headed in the opposite direction. So, not a good start for Denver. And it only got worse last night against Kansas City, who now extend their streak over the Denver Broncos to 16 straight games. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Russell Wilson, some potential trade candidates before the deadline, and, of course, the boo-boo breakdown with Vic Troha later in the show. But coming to help me do all that is Brad Spielberger. How's it going, Brad?
Hey, it's going great. Yeah, Russell Wilson never had sub 100 passing yards in the Nathaniel Hackett era, so I'm not sure what exactly Sean Payton thinks he's fixed over there. Can we talk about your tweet late last night? You just randomly brought up a tweet from earlier in the offseason. Are you conspiracy theorizing, or you think you're onto something there?
Well, as luck would have it, I believe Tyler has the audio queued up of what Sean Payton said on the Colin Cowherd show back when he was a media guy rather than a head coach. So hit it, Tyler. What do we got?
It's healthy when we, in scouting, like to say, well, who does he remind you of? And we're not putting that pressure on Caleb saying, oh, you're going to be the next Mahomes. But it's very good when you can say he's like this. Yeah. And so I brought it up yesterday on the show. I think he's a generational player now. I've seen 3 or 4 games, obviously not as much as I would if I was truly doing the evaluation. But it's
a truly generational player, Caleb Williams. Now, there's like a 3-minute clip there that I tweeted, and he goes on to say that not only is he a generational player, but he is, in fact, so good that he is going to cause NFL teams to tank for him to the point that the NFL is going to have to introduce a lottery system to stop that happening again, right? And this is a guy who, remember, has got like quite a long history of antagonism with the NFL directly. I'm not saying Sean Payton is deliberately blowing up everything and tanking for Caleb Williams. I am, however, saying there's just a few data points pointing in that direction now.
Yeah, not that it would have impacted the final score, but the timeout at the end of the first half to basically allow the Chiefs to kick a field goal. I think he himself called it a dumb decision after the game. It would not have swung the outcome, but just all these little things here and there. He's probably regretting the massive comeback against the Chicago Bears because the Broncos would then be 0-6 and have a bunch of head-to-heads against other contenders for that first overall pick. Go ahead.
And remember, that comeback was like a defensive player scoop and score, changes the outcome kind of thing. It's like, even that, it's like we kind of had that loss in the bag, and then some stupid edge rusher goes and wins the game for us. God damn it.
Yeah, it would have been down, and Sean Payton would have been spamming like Samaje Perine 2-yard carries at the end of the game, kind of like the late, they're down 2 scores, and they throw like a screen pass to him. It probably was just a check down outlet, and then he fumbles and loses that game as well. So, yeah, look, he brought it up himself. So we're merely just following his own words. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, Caleb Williams is that good. The Broncos are that bad. They obviously want to change things around. I'm sure Sean Payton would love to get to work with a quote-unquote generational prospect like he is, and they are squarely in that conversation because I think even some of the few talented players they do have on the roster may no longer be there in the next couple of weeks. I mean, the biggest drama of the night may have been Jerry Jeudy dancing in the background of Steve Smith Sr.'s hit before the game even started.
That was wild. I don't know how much people are aware of that, but if you go searching Steve Smith on Twitter, you'll sort of find all of the various parts of it. But he, on his own podcast, what's it called? Cut to It, I think. He had basically criticized Jerry Jeudy and said he's sort of not doing a whole lot of anything, really. Apparently that made Jerry Jeudy upset. So Steve Smith had, because Jerry Jeudy played well recently, Steve Smith tried to talk to him before the game, so to be like, hey, I want to apologize for saying this and, go ball out tonight. But Jerry Jeudy was having none of it and, in fact, was trying to, start arguments with Steve Smith, which, by the way, is one of the dumbest moves anybody's ever thought about as a player. Like, let's go start a fight with Steve Smith. And then this just escalated over the course of the pregame. Jeudy dancing around behind the shot, almost antagonizing Steve Smith to attack him and lose his mind. Steve Smith maintained the high road and didn't. Just blowtorched him on national TV and, ripped him for being a completely average nothing of a player. Tier 3, I think, was what he called him.
I don't know about it. Took the high road. I mean, I do think.
Oh, that was taking the high road
calls
relative.
Me and asks. Oh, go ahead.
Well, he was like, "Look, I'm not going to kill him. I value my job. Sure. I'm not going to lose my job."
It's all relative on the Steve Smith scale of what he could have done out there, just taking a charge at him. But yeah, I mean, him saying if a team calls me and asks, "Should I trade for this player?" I tell them no. Might just be his football opinion, not just tied to the personal element here. But yeah, Jeudy was actually very good at the end of last year. The top 15 graded wide receiver for us from, I want to say week 5 or so on, when their offense went from horrible to just bad. He was the main guy in that offense. But yeah, I mean, maybe they trade him. Maybe they also trade Courtland Sutton, who had one of the cooler touchdown catches of the season thus far last night. Obviously, relatively meaningless, but an awesome snag nonetheless. Release Frank Clark today. And I think in a lot of ways, ignoring all the other stuff, and it does make sense. Jonathan Cooper had 6 pressures last night, forced the interception of Mahomes, forced an intentional grounding on Mahomes, and had a sack. And then Baron Browning, who was awesome last year, I think should return next week. So there's no reason for this team not to play a bunch of young players, let them all get experience, get reps, and yeah, lose some more games and get in that Caleb Williams sweepstakes.
So, conspiracy theories aside, do you think there's anything to that? Because when you look at one of the ironies of the game last night is that Denver's defense actually showed up for the first time maybe this entire season, right? This is a defense that are getting blown out at a historical rate, putting some of the worst numbers we've ever seen out there, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. And, it had, and even dialing down or drilling down deeper into that, some of the underlying numbers looked even worse from a matchup perspective. Now, the Chiefs end up covering, but it wasn't the blowout that everybody thought it would or should have been. And then in the one game where that actually happens, the Denver offense just completely self-destructs again, right? It looked more like last year than this year's version, which had been taking steps in the right direction. But when you look at the plays that they're calling, it's this doesn't look like, Sean Payton, whatever you think about him, was a very smart head coach and offensive mind who called smart plays and generally put players in a good position to succeed. He's not a guy who calls timeout on 4th and 3 and dials up a play that never looked like it had any shot of working at any point and leads to a sack, right? What are we doing here? You look at what they're calling late in the game when they're trying to theoretically mount some kind of comeback. And this does not look like an offense that's really trying to win.
It truly did not. And like you said, the defense did show up. I think part of that also was the Kansas City Chiefs offense. They continue to be atrocious on the 3rd and short. I actually, tweeted last night, I thought maybe Eric Bieniemy, losing him was a big element of that. They were 31st in EPA per play on 3rd and 1 last year as well. And they just always get too cute. Everyone, in Chicago loves to, I get a million Matt Nagy responses in my comments. Look, Andy Reid's running the offense, and that's his, it's where he learned all of his football from to a degree. So, but it's just why are you doing a fake field goal when you could just drop back with Patrick Mahomes? Why you're kicking some early field goals? I know it was windy and there were other elements at play, but the Chiefs could have scored 30 points fairly easily if a couple other things swing their way. But yeah, the offensive play calling, which has been largely pretty good, for the Broncos so far this season, top half of the NFL in a bunch of, underlying metrics. Granted, they played some horrible defenses, but yeah, it was just not a winning recipe by any stretch. And then Russ, man, we'll get into him in a little bit here, but it just looks broken. Even plays where we could blame, some of the offensive linemen, the Chris Jones sack on Mike McGlinchey. I mean, Russ could have taken 4 steps up in the pocket on that play. He was only about 8 yards back, so it's not like he was hanging 12 yards deep, but just little elements of that. Yeah, taking a sack on 4th down. It's just the whole thing is broken.
Yeah, and the thing is, it had looked a little bit better up until basically last night, and then it went all the way back to just complete disaster again. And maybe Russell Wilson does look a little bit more athletic than he did last year, but it's still bad decisions, right? It's still not enough to be like he's never was and is never going to be Lamar Jackson or Justin Fields, so you can't survive just with the athleticism. You still need to be a functional, high-level quarterback as well, and that isn't there right now. We'll get onto the Chiefs' offense in a second, but Travis Kelce was fantastic in that game, even with his bum ankle. Obviously, they were feeding him early in the game. You get the lateral, which I'm fascinated by those plays because everybody within Kansas City maintains that they are basically Travis Kelce going rogue mid-play. But they look designed in terms of the plays are drawing up trail runners. Like there's a guy there by design at almost all times in these plays, right? And maybe Travis Kelce certainly has he's deciding to pitch it to him, but he's there. Like it's not like there are offenses in the NFL where that would not be an option. The guy simply would not be in the vicinity because the plays are not being designed that way. So I'm kind of curious. I don't know how much that is true, that it's just 100% Travis Kelce deciding to goof around and throw a lateral when he can.
Yeah, Mahomes was on the post-game, dais with the people, and he said, he does it in practice a bunch, and he's not supposed to. It's not part of the play. But like you said, I mean, Noah Gray is running like right in the perfect path to where you'd want to hypothetically lateral the ball. I got a feeling maybe it's a little bit of it's an option, it's a choice. Yeah. Please don't do it unless it's perfect. And in that situation, I think, there was no one near Noah Gray. Kelce was flat-footed at that point, so it made a lot of sense. Got them the first down, but. Yeah, I think maybe they're just kind of trying to hide that from the people a little bit. I'm sure it's an element they're at least open to doing, once or twice a game.
It looks too much like other plays in the NFL over the last few years that are clearly by design, right? That have been drawn out specifically for crazy 3rd and 1,000,000 situations or late in the game. It's like they are similar plays that have a specific designed support line by a player running a different route to arrive right after that guy catches the ball. It's too well coordinated for this to be just complete coincidence and, oh no, Travis has done it again. Let's stop him doing that. I think it is part of that offense, and he's the perfect guy to be executing it because he's, he does it and he's capable of doing that. The other element of that game was Chris Jones, as you said, the sack on Mike McGlinchey. He is now dialing up. He's really interesting because he's still playing on the edge, right? Not all the time. Remember, there was this whole thing of, they're going to move him to be a full-time edge rusher. And he was good at that. It's just he took away what he brings on the inside. And then they moved him back inside. And now he seems to have found this balance where he'll play inside most of the time, but he'll then move outside and wreck an offensive tackle for a sack most of the time, and then move back, right? And I kind of wonder, I haven't looked this up yet, but whether he specifically knows that just by being a freakish, 6'6", 310-pound body type, it's going to win the first time he does it because no offensive tackle is prepared for that. And then, so he just does it for when is the first big 3rd and long play that we're going to have? Let's dial it up for now. I'll get the sack, high leverage play, and then I don't have to do it that much more in the game. It's amazing the way he's able to just sort of turn it on almost at will.
That rep in particular was crazy to me, too, because I mentioned, Russell Wilson was not that far behind the line of scrimmage. I was looking at it because I was kind of wondering, was this maybe more Russ's fault than McGlinchey's? He was 8 yards or less behind the line of scrimmage, A. B, Chris Jones gets the edge and bends around the edge. It wasn't like he had, speed to power or just bull rush Mike McGlinchey. No, he dipped his inside shoulder and just beat him around the edge. And I haven't looked at it. I would guarantee you it was less than 2.5 seconds. It may have been less than 2 seconds. It was a clean, well-executed bend around the edge by a, 300-pound guy. Yeah, I mean, he's absurd. He had a bunch of wins the rest of the night as well. He threw McGlinchey on a run play as well, just tossed him to the side and got in the backfield immediately. But here's the crazy thing, too. So, A, the Chiefs have the youngest defense in the NFL by average age. And B, Charles Omenihu comes off a suspension and joins the lineup next week. He was awesome last year. He also has inside-outside flex. I mean, Steve Spagnuolo is probably going to have both those guys on the edge, both rushing from the interior. I mean, they're going to dial up a whole lot of looks with both of those guys in the fold now.
No, absolutely. The defense is only getting bolstered, and it looks pretty good to begin with. Let's talk about the offense, though, because – again, it didn't really fire on all cylinders. Patrick Mahomes made a couple of pretty big mistakes that he doesn't tend to make, but now we've got, 6 games into the season for them, only one of which looked like the Chiefs, right? The game against Chicago, where they looked like they were going to threaten Miami's 70 points and then eventually benched everybody and dialed it back. But last season, the Chiefs' offense averaged 29 points a game. Outside of that Chicago game this year, they're averaging 8 points less than that. So like a whole touchdown and then some less than they were averaging a year ago. The offense is not clicking the way it clicked in the past. The defense is playing better, so it's sort of making up for it. And you've at least got that one Bears game in there to say, theoretically, it's still in there. But at what point do we start to wonder if this is going to come together?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, Denver's defense, like we talked about, has been historically bad, so you'd want to see a huge output. The funny thing, though, is Mahomes still averaged 7.7 yards per attempt, and I think his best throw of the entire night was dropped by Justin Watson down the right sideline. I mean, it was absolutely perfect, right in the breadbasket, and he just couldn't make a play. So I wouldn't say I'm concerned yet, but you do. The beautiful thing of Prime Vision last night is you can watch the receivers run their routes. Guys are not really getting open. I think Rashee Rice is becoming more and more of a focal point, and he wins over the middle, but he's getting a lot of free releases, or he's sitting down in soft spots against zone. You don't see a whole lot of man from Denver and Vance Joseph, but when you watch those reps, it's Travis Kelce or it's Mahomes throwing a back shoulder ball, or going backyard football, and a guy gets open not on the route, but gets open just because he kind of freelances. The Kadarius Toney, the whole playbook with Kadarius Toney should just be thrown out the window. It doesn't work. He has an average at the target about 2 yards, and he did the touchdown last night. But I think every other play was probably a negative play. I'm not going to say they have to trade for someone or they should be panicking or yada, yada. But, yeah, on the outside, they're not winning really at all right now.
It is worth pointing out as well that, for this season – they didn't have Travis Kelce week 1. He got injured against Minnesota. He's playing not 100%. Okay, he's still cooking, but they haven't had their number one primary weapon and target in the passing game for periods of the game or periods of the season, and healthy for an even bigger period of the season. So presumably there's more to come. But yeah, it is kind of concerning that wide receiver group who, up until now, the biggest concern has been just sort of figuring it out from a fantasy perspective. But from the offensive perspective, it's at some stage, we actually do need these guys to take a significant step forward and dominate. The other element I think that's different to a year ago is the changes they've made on the offensive line have not necessarily been positive ones. Donovan Smith had a 47.7 pass blocking grade in the game last night. Jawan Taylor, has been well advertised, the sort of issues he's been dealing with in terms of took the piss on opening night with a lineman and jumping offside, and now he's sort of getting persecuted with that in terms of penalties, but also hasn't actually been playing that well. So he's a guy who a lot of offensive line Twitter or whatever puts out there as being one of the best pass blockers in the entire NFL. The PFF grades have never been that kind to him. He's been good, not great, in that area, and now he's not playing as well as he has in the past.
We probably talked about it last year. I'm sure you and I at the Combine. I had a projection for him going to free agency. I want to say of $16 million a year, and I frankly thought that was generous. I was like, yeah, he's young, he's been good, and we all know how the nature of free agency works. And I had a couple people be like, you're way too low. He's not taking anything less than $18 million a year. And look, sometimes I hear that and I say, depending on who I hear from, but this came from people that have nothing to do with Jawan Taylor in any way, shape, or form. So I think I bumped it up to 18, and he goes out and gets $20 million a year from a very good front office and very good building. So, yeah, has not played up to his standard yet. And the beauty of it, though, I think, is that because of how good the interior is, and then Patrick Mahomes is our highest graded rushing quarterback. Obviously, that's all scrambles, not design runs, but it kind of mitigates that issue. But Yeah, at a certain point, if their tackles are not holding up well and they can't win outside downfield, Marquez Valdez-Scantling had 0 targets on 30 routes run last night. I guess I do wonder, do we ever get to a point where they're so good, 7 yards and in over the middle of the field with, Rasheed and Travis and Noah Gray and Sky Moore and et cetera, that eventually teams say, okay, we can't lose, but death by 1,000 cuts. We have to maybe not play single high, but just like cheat a little bit and expose the outside deep, and then the Chiefs go back to being the 2019 Chiefs with all the explosives. I'm sure teams would still take this path as opposed to that one, but that's probably the way they accomplish it is just, all right, we're just going to kill you on 7 yards a clip until you adjust.
Yeah. The other element of Jawan Taylor is he's been actively bad as a run blocker for like 3 straight years now. So whatever he is as a pass blocker, obviously that's the more important element, particularly in this offense. But even assuming he was going to be as good as a pass blocker as he thought he was going to be, you are signing up to be voluntarily bad at run blocking on that side of the line. And he's not holding up his end of the bargain as a pass blocker this season as well. So I think it is a problem if he continues at this level for the whole way. You bring up an interesting point, though, because during that game, Denver, like in the first half, it's like, how do you stop Travis Kelce? Like, this is literally unstoppable right now. They end up putting Patrick Surtain on him and being like, all right, let's just put our best cover guy on Travis Kelce and hope that does it. And even that couldn't stop it. Like, Surtain was in tight coverage, but the ball still got there and Travis Kelce still made the catch. It's like, okay, we still can't stop this. And you're right. You now have this weird tension between, this is probably the more efficient way of playing defense, because while they're doing this, they're not dropping a 50-yard bomb to somebody over the top and putting 7 on the board immediately. Maybe it'll falter somewhere. But you can only be beaten by so many of these plays before you're like, you have to stop this. Like, I don't even care. Just do something. Fix it. This is too bad. Because, you don't want to listen necessarily to the opinion of fans, but you reach a point and it's like, how are they still getting beaten by the same thing, right? Like, fix this. And the reason it's happening is because the alternative, the way of fixing it, is to open up something way more dangerous by clamping an extra guy down on him and taking him out of the secondary.
Yeah, and obviously this would probably be correct, but Mahomes has not been very good throwing the ball deep this year at all. He's actually one of our lowest graded quarterbacks on throws 20-plus yards downfield, and I'm sure that is by design, by defenses, again, just taking that out of the playbook. But then you also see last night on Amazon Prime, shout out Sam Schwartzstein. Isaiah Pacheco is one of, I think, 3 running backs with positive EPA on the season. Like, he's not, he didn't break off anything huge last night, but I remember 1 or 2, negative gains or unsuccessful runs. Everything else was 6-7 yards against light boxes. And so, yeah, it's interesting. Like, maybe we do see that adjustment to a degree. You get some 3 safety looks or teams get exotic with what they do. Like, I kind of think of a Ravens situation where Geno Stone's been a good deep ball guy or, deep third guy. Obviously, Marcus Williams can do that as well. Like, do you just try to really get different and do different things against them? But they're going to kill you. Whatever you take away, they're just going to kill you on what you give them.
The last thing I wanted to mention in this game was that play the Chiefs did on 4th and 2, where the fake field goal, essentially, where they shifted into the tush push, brotherly love, double cheek push, brotherly shove, rather, double cheek push, whatever you want to call that thing. They lined up, to kick a field goal and then shifted into that formation just before the snap and tried to get 2 yards out of it. There's a few layers to this. Number one, like, the Chiefs are definitely hurting themselves because they refuse to run a bog standard QB sneak with Patrick Mahomes, right? He got hurt that one time, dislocated knee, cap, or whatever it was, and now they just refuse to make him run a QB sneak. And so they're coming up with this like endless variety of ways of not running a QB sneak and just running something different. And it's not helping because most of them aren't working, right? They need to figure out some way of doing that. Even if you have a designated sneak quarterback and just trot out, the backup and have him run the QB sneak. Do something, because this is madness. But then you get to this play. On the one hand, it's kind of clever, right? Because when you line up to kick a field goal, you can't line up directly over the center. There's a gap in the middle of the formation on defense. And if you can get it done quick enough, you should have like a clear pathway to yardage. Now, the problem is, and I suspect the issue with this is, I actually think it's quite a clever idea that you don't know whether or not it's going to work until you run it, because it's entirely down to how quickly the Denver defense sees what you're doing and adjusts to it, and they did it quickly enough, right? Because the downside is if the Broncos defense shifts back quickly enough and essentially stuffs up those A-gaps, now all of a sudden you're relying on a long snapper to block like straight ahead for 2 yards against a defensive formation, and a long snapper is not going to block like Jason Kelsey. It's just not going to happen. So I actually feel he got ridiculed for this, and it's like this is one of the worst like play calls decisions ever. I actually think conceptually it's not the worst idea in the world, but you don't know if they're going to be able to get it quickly enough until you run it, and if it doesn't happen, you look like an idiot.
Yeah, so two things. I do think one thought in the back of my mind has been like all these failures probably will set up something down the road, maybe in the playoffs, to where they do something off of it and it actually works when it really matters.
Or just
but
run
second,
a sneak.
Sam, they have one of the greatest designated QB sneakers in college football history. They got the Belldozer, Blake Bell, on the roster. Give him the ball, and maybe, just like I said about a wrinkle, maybe he does it one time, but he actually rolls out and throws a pass or something. But yeah, I mean, they have one of the GOATs, the Oklahoma legend, Blake Bell, in the mix. Why not?
Yeah, I just think they get too desperate to avoid Mahomes doing that. There are better solutions than, random ass trick play, particularly to try and get 2 yards. I mean, whatever it was, 4th and inches, maybe, but 4th and 2. The second Denver shifts back towards the middle, you're like, it's dead. It's not happening. Not a chance.
DJ Jones and Mike Purcell are good players. Like they have the guys there at that position too. It's not like you're doing it against a team maybe lacks a good nose tackle. Yeah, I think it was like a little bit over 2 yards as well. That's a 1.5 yard and in type of play.
Yeah, particularly again when we're talking about a long snapper trying to execute that. Yeah. That's just unlikely to happen. But anyway, before we get into our next topics, we've got to talk to you about Fabric, the most important task you're going to have this season, securing your family's financial future, starting with life insurance. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it quick, easy, and affordable to protect your family so you can get back to enjoying life. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a high-quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. It has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget, with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in minutes and apply when it's convenient to you. It's all online and on your schedule. You go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. MEET fabric.com/PFFNFL. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, I want to talk about Russell Wilson. Clearly, it was disastrous last night. I kind of agreed with the way Tony Gonzalez summed it up on the post-game show, which is he's not the answer. I'm not saying he's the problem, but he's not the answer, and that's the important part here. He'd signed this crazy giant contract extension. Everyone was like, that ties him to Denver until the year 2082 or whatever. What are their options at this point? Like, let's say we've decided already, Sean Payton's had a look at this. Russell Wilson's aw shucks thing is rubbing him up the wrong way. He's not playing well enough that he's willing to deal with that. So Payton has already written him off, right? It's like, how do I get out of this? What are their options? How quickly can they get out of this? And what are we dealing with here?
I will say, not to be mean to the guy, he got rocked near the sideline by, I think, Willie Gay or Nick Bolton, and not a single Denver Broncos player did anything about it. Like, it was like barely in bounds. Like, it was Justin Herbert's same distance from the sideline, and the entire bench cleared. So, but anyway, not going to pick on Russ any further. So, look, I think unless you can try to pull off the Brock Osweiler type trade where you basically attach a draft pick to his salary and send it elsewhere, which I think is kind of a fantasy, they have to do a post-June 1st release this upcoming offseason in 2024. So here's why I say that. So he is owed $39 million for 2024 in both cash and salary cap, which you're going to have to pay. But if you don't cut him before March 21st of next year, his $37 million 2025 salary, when he's 37 years old, becomes fully guaranteed. So what you do is the beginning of the 2024 offseason, March 18th, you do a post-June 1 designated cut of Russell Wilson. You'll have $35 million in dead money for 2024 and $50 million in dead money for 2025. Yeah, so you're still talking, $85 million in dead money, but you have to do it. I mean, you cannot let a fully guaranteed salary of $37 million in 2025, become, a vest. Like, you cannot let that happen. So that's what I think needs to happen is you do a post-June 1 this offseason, you eat $39 million cash and $85 million in total, dead cap. But that is actually, as scary as it sounds, that's the best path forward, and they got to do it.
There is a chunk of that money that is guaranteed for injury, right? Are they reaching a point where they actually need to think about not playing him this season? Because if he gets hurt, they're kind of stuck with him for an additional sum of money or an additional level of guarantee.
Yeah, if he can't pass a physical by that March date I mentioned, then it would be, the money would be his regardless, right? Because it is already injury guaranteed. It becomes fully guaranteed, which means it becomes guaranteed, for cap and skill, which the whole thing won't get into. But yeah, so look, I mean, they paid Jarrett Stidham a good chunk of change this past offseason. 2-year deal, I want to say $10 or $12 million. A guy that a lot of teams around the league do like and think is probably a backup, but a good backup, in that Mike White, Jacoby Brissett, whatever conversation. I don't think that move was by accident. And I don't know if it happens now, but yeah, I think there comes a time where they're, they could be 1-7. They play the Chiefs again in 2 weeks. They have a couple other tough games in the schedule going forward. Yeah, there probably is a conversation of, look, Russ takes a lot of hits. He takes a lot of sacks. And we can't afford that risk. I think we do maybe get into that conversation in a month or so.
That's what happened with Derek Carr, right? Like, they decided if he gets hurt, we're screwed. So take him off the field. Like, we can't risk him getting injured and this screwing up the plan to move on from Derek Carr. And and that happened late in the year. Maybe that's when it happens with Russ. But there probably is a point where they go, this is not worth playing him because otherwise we're in real trouble here. Is there any hope that they can trade him to anybody?
So that's the thing. So if you want to prioritize cash over, draft picks, which again, that was an issue because they obviously traded to get Russ. They traded to get Sean Payton, a first and a second round pick. And the second is this year.
Right.
Yeah, you'd have to do the Brock Osweiler. And I think you're talking about literally attaching your own 2025 first or whatever to him. And he probably still would have to rework his contract, maybe reduce salary or reduce guarantees or something. I don't know. I think it's a pipe dream. I don't think unless, some terrible team just wants to add more draft capital, you would probably get a very good pick from Denver. Even if they do get Caleb Williams, they're not going to win a ton of games in 2024. But I think the most realistic thing is you just eat a bunch of cash, eat a bunch of dead cap, and just kind of let Sean Payton figure things out for the next 2 years.
And that's the thing is it's going to happen this offseason, right? Like, people are looking at the dead cap numbers or the potential pain involved in getting rid of Russell Wilson and going, like, he's here until 2025 at the earliest. Sounds like you agree with me that they're just going to have to suck it up and eat that dead money and get rid of him this offseason.
You have no choice. You just got to do it, bite the bullet, admit the mistake. And it's, a larger conversation of it's tough because the way we kind of analyze GMs is by all the big moves they make. I'm sure Sean Payton at this point is basically dictating everything and running the building. And yeah, did George Payton make a bunch of big mistakes on a lot of his biggest moves? I mean, Russell Wilson, Randy Gregory, trading for Sean Payton, funnily enough, probably on that list as well. But there's so much good there. But yeah, I think he's probably, on the way out. And so then you just kind of blame it all on the past regime, bite the bullet, do all that. You bring in the rookie quarterback, and if you don't spend a ton and you blame it on, all, and you just kind of say, hey, we're trying to get back to being good in 2025, 2026 range. Let us figure that out. I think it's what happens.
All right, so Russell Wilson's not getting moved before the trade deadline, but who are some players that you think could actually get moved before the deadline and potentially make an impact for, an acquiring team looking to add talent?
Yeah, so Denver, of course, now at 1-5. I think you got to keep an eye on Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. I think both of those guys have been, they've been the subject of trade talks going back to last year. I think the price needs to come down for both of those players probably. The Jeudy, they apparently wanted a first. You're not getting a first-round pick for Jerry Jeudy at this point. And Sutton, I'm guessing they probably want to look a third. You're not getting a third for Cortland Sutton. He's a good player. He obviously, like I said, had the awesome touchdown catch last night, but $14 million salary. Maybe if you eat a bunch of that like you did Randy Gregory, maybe then you get a third, but still probably, a bit of a tough sell there. then you look at the other bad teams, and we have a bunch of them playing against each other this weekend. Minnesota without Justin Jefferson now, 1-4 going into Chicago. If they lose that game, but even if they don't, Danielle Hunter should be traded. They just have to do it. He's the best player on the defense. I get that, but 28 years old, turns 29 in a couple weeks. Will get you a nice value in return, and they need to start over the whole defense anyway. So I look there a little bit. The Patriots, they probably need to admit that they're just not close right now. I look at a guy like Michael Onwenu, who obviously we love, has been a good player across the offensive line, not playing well this year. But, they drafted Antonio Mafi, City So, all these guys this past year to replace him. You might as well just do it there. Super interesting name, maybe Josh Uche. I don't know if they do it, but it could be interesting there. And then Carolina. Brian Burns should be a name we keep an eye on. I think a guy like Terrace Marshall had 9 catches in week 4, didn't play a snap in week 5. When that happens, your antenna goes up a little bit as to why that's happening. So, yeah, look at the bad teams and look at the players that actually have value. I guess last one, Chicago. I don't think it's going to happen, but you look across the NFL landscape and try to find a cornerback on the trade market, and I've been asked by 10 different fan bases on Twitter. I think the only player is Jalen Johnson in Chicago. He's a guy that legitimately could come in, for some teams be a number 1 corner, for others be a high-end number 2. On the last year of his contract, the Bears have Kyler Gordon, Tyreek Stevenson, and Terrell Smith, all guys they recently drafted. They're obviously not a very good football team. I just think that the price there could be so good, the Bears can't afford to pass it up. So, yeah, those are a couple headline names there.
Two really interesting names, probably one of which is relevant to this, that I thought were really interesting, was Washington in this situation they put themselves in with Chase Young and Montez Sweat. And Chase Young in particular, we talked about it on the show one of the days earlier in this week. He's playing really well, maybe rushing the passer as well as he has ever done it in the NFL, coming back off that injury. Washington obviously declined his 5th-year option, effectively said, we probably don't think Chase Young is either going to be the guy, or at least we're going to make him prove it. But now they're in this spot where both Chase Young and Montez Sweat are reaching the end of their contracts. They only have one franchise tag between the two of them. As you pointed out in your write-up, they share representation, so they can't pit one of them against the other one, because the agent's not going to be up for that. So Washington either has to watch one of these guys, if not both of them, walk out the door, or try and trade one of them so that they can use the franchise tag on the other.
The biggest thing for Chase Young, too, is on a Thursday game, so short rest, because he obviously still has the injury things going on, had 11 pressures and a 38% pass rush win rate against the Bears in that game. Yeah, look, I really was shocked they did not pick up his 5th-year option. They literally did the exact same thing with Deron Payne and regretted it immediately and had to place a franchise tag. So now you try to go to Montez Sweat, hypothetically, and get an extension done just to free up that franchise tag for Chase Young. Yeah, the reps are probably going to ask for the moon, because the free agency benefits everyone. It benefits the player themselves. It benefits the entire league. It's tough because it's a classic situation where it's a coaching staff and a front office that are probably coaching and GMing for their jobs this season. But from the high level, from the franchise's perspective, not trading Chase Young at the deadline for more than you would get in a hypothetical comp pick situation is just bad business. So I don't know if I expect it, but they really, really should look into doing it. Because even if you do retain both, all right, you're then paying your defensive line like $130 million a year, between 4 guys if you try to work that out. So, I don't know, I guess you could tag and trade. But anyway, I think look, the new owner, Josh Harris, should come in and say, I get that you want to keep talent and win a lot of football games and save your jobs. Put his thumb on the scale and force them to make a move, because it just is bad business if they don't.
I saw you wrote that point in how much, because that's a sort of reasonably sophisticated level of understanding how the business works from an ownership point of view. Like Josh Harris rocked in there a few weeks ago. How in tune with that level of sophistication of cap management, all this kind of stuff, do you think he is? And if he isn't, is somebody advising him with that kind of thing? Because you're right, an experienced owner, that's exactly what should happen, right? This guy should come in and say, hey, you might not want to do this, but actually this is the best thing for the team. We're going to go in this direction. Does he know that at this point? And if not, is somebody in his ear that does?
It's a very good question. I do think we know he's a huge football fan. He's talked about kind of being in the mix by the Commanders for a long time now. I think secondly, the Philadelphia 76ers are, of course, one of the most analytically forward-thinking teams in all of professional sports. I'm sure Daryl Morey, I'm sure he's kind of thrown some ideas his way. There are those brain trusts in certain, owners that own multiple teams. They sometimes have a data science or analytics team that kind of oversees all of the teams. I don't think we've read anything that's happening in Washington right now. And then lastly, if I'm him, you live in Philadelphia, or I guess, I don't know, you own the 76ers. The Eagles they're the smartest organization in the entire NFL. So, I don't know, maybe you call up Jeffrey Lurie and ask his opinion, and maybe you should do that now in the same division and all that. But it's a good question. I don't know, but, I mean, Josh, if you're listening, you should probably trade Chase Young.
Or just, Brad will be happy to work as a consultant. It's going to... A modest six-figure sum is all it's going to take to secure Brad's service for, a phone call every now and again. That's all we're talking about here. It's perfectly reasonable. Don't worry about it. The Commanders cost you $6 billion. It's an order of magnitude less than that to get Brad's services on the phone. So, look, anytime we can connect billionaires with consultants on the show, that's what we're here for. Before we get into the boo-boo breakdown, we're going to talk to you about this show being brought to you by Prize Picks. If you were paying attention last night, the Prize Picks we gave you out, we're 50-50. Chris Jones and George Karlaftis, they did get over 1.25 combined sacks. Chris Jones, anyway. Javonte Williams and Rashee Rice, neither of them got in the end zone, so that's under the 0.5 combined touchdowns. Now, for this weekend, the picks, as delivered by the great ZT, Zach Tantillo, Deebo Samuel and George Kittle combined for over, 0.5 rushing and receiving touchdowns. So basically, one of those guys scores, you're good. And then DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett over 0.5 rushing and receiving touchdowns. So if either one of those Seahawks receivers scores, you are golden. Prize Picks is a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. How does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players and whether they'll go more or less than their Prize Picks projection. You can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. At Prize Picks, you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections. Prize Picks entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. You can even pick in-game projections after a game has started, which includes halves, quarters, periods, and more. Go to prizepicks.com/PFFNFL and use the code PFFNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/PFFNFL and use code PFFNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Brad, thank you so much for coming on the show today and giving us all of your insight. And now we're going to talk to Vic.
Sounds good.
All right, back in studio as ever on a Friday for the boo-boo breakdown. Our injury run around the NFL is our guy, Vic Troha. How's it going, Vic?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Not bad. All right, let's get right into it. We've had a pretty big week of significant injuries. I guess the most obvious of which is, well, two big ones I think are probably worth spending a little time on. Number one, Justin Jefferson with another hamstring injury and pretty much straight to IR. So it's not a good one, presumably.
Yeah, when you see a hamstring injury that quickly sends a player to IR, you know it's a pretty significant strain. The one thing with Justin Jefferson is you kind of look at that dynamic of where the team's at, what he means to the team. Is it worth him rushing back?
Right.
I think the combination of all of that and then the severity of his injury, easy decision to IR.
Is there any connection with, because when you watched him do that during the game, it looked relatively innocuous. Is there any connection to like how you strain the hamstring with the severity of the strain itself? Like just what looks like a fairly innocuous tweak ends up being like a significant grade, whatever, hamstring injury.
Well, it's interesting because there is the severity of it can happen at that given point. So what I mean by that is you look at his injury and it wasn't like he was dealing with a tweak from before, and we've talked about how like hamstrings just don't go away. So when you have the severity of it that happens all at once, yeah, there's probably more muscle fibers torn. When they did the MRI, they haven't really given the exact report yet, but they were looking at how much damage was done off of that one impact. The weird thing was he actually tried to go back out there. He was trying to get warmed up to get back out there, and I looked at that from the get-go, and I said this would be a bad choice if he got back on the field, because once you have like a pretty significant injury at the beginning there, then all of those minor tweaks come back, and then they can add up to be something major. So I think with them, they were just like, we got to shut you down. We just got to call it quits. And even now, I don't see him trying to push it back when he comes back from IR. So
Yeah, I mean, now once he's on IR, I think it's a whole different world. And then the other one I think is Anthony Richardson, who now, it was a grade 3 AC joint injury. Grade 3 to me is just a terrifying, red flag words. Those are frightening terms because that's bad, right?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I heard you and Steve talking about this a little bit earlier. So there is 6 grades of AC joint strains.
Okay. Is that different? Because all these things are done in grades, right? It's
Yeah.
usually 1, 2, 3 is all you hear about.
Like a lot, like
all
an
of them
ankle
have
sprain.
up to 6? Yeah.
No, like an ankle sprain is like 3.
Okay.
The reason AC joint is different is because grades 1 and 2 are damage to the ligaments, and then when you get to a grade 3, you see tearing and separation. Grade 3 on an AC joint, and for those listening that don't know what that is, that's basically the end of your clavicle. That's just the tip of your clavicle, how it connects to your shoulder. When you get a grade 3 AC joint strain, there's separation of that joint and torn ligaments. It's the strain level that has surgical potential. So when I saw that he was getting input on surgery, I automatically knew it was at least a 3, but judging by how it was, I didn't think it was a 4 or 5. He's probably going to be back and heal fully. I haven't heard any updates on if he's going to have surgery, which makes me think no, which also tells me that he probably could be back after after the IR stint, and they have a bye week in there too. So I wouldn't be surprised if he does come back and he's relatively healthy, but it's not worth putting a rookie in now with an injured shoulder like that.
So a grade 3 AC shoulder injury is that as bad as a grade 3, say, ankle ligament injury?
They're different, because when you look at like a grade 3 ankle injury, that's about as severe as you get with the ankle. With a grade 3 on the AC joint, it's just identifying that there is tearing and separation. So because there's more complexity to the levels of it, it doesn't mean that it's like necessarily as comparable as far as the severity of it, but it just shows that there's that much more level of damage that can happen at that joint.
Okay, but theoretically, this is not something that just because you hear grade 3, it means like he could be done for the year, we're shutting him down. This is a Drew Brees, like, this is scaring teams off in the offseason type of thing. This is just, it's bad, but he'll be back and he'll be fine.
Yeah, like you just saw Carr with the AC joint, right? Well, his wasn't a grade 3, it was probably like a 2. And the one thing that's also different, and you just have to put this into the context of who they are and what the reasoning of them coming back for. They're not going to be injecting Richardson's shoulder through the week just so he can get through a practice, where Carr can probably miss practice and be okay to get out there. He's a veteran. He knows how to prepare his body better. Where Richardson, on the other hand, is a rookie who's going to need those practices, and they're not just going to inject him so he can get out there to practice. So there is differences there too, just based off the player.
When he's back, do they and he need to change the way they're playing him? Like, because this happened on a run play, essentially being chased down from behind and fallen on, right? Or driven into the turf. Do we need to, like, when he comes back from the shoulder injury, is this now a concern that either short or long term, we need to change the way you're playing the game? You can't become this Cam Newton style power running quarterback.
Yeah, I think, well, if Anthony Richardson's listening right now, he needs to call Murray and get Kyler to teach him how to slide like a baseball slide, because he's just physical and he runs down the field. Now, I don't think that Anthony Richardson, and we've had this talk in the past, I don't think he is injury prone. And the reason I say that is because he's had a concussion, he's had a shoulder, he's had a knee contusion. The similarity behind all of that isn't that it's like the same body part by any means. It's that all three of those happened when he was scrambling and running down the field. It wasn't even out of the pocket, like, behind the line of scrimmage. It was downfield, getting extra yardage, taking too big of hits for a quarterback. And he's a physical player. So I think what needs to happen is when they come back, if he's scrambling, fine. Just get him down. Don't take those blows. They have clearly added up already in his short career. So my concern would mostly be like, hey, you can't afford this much longer.
Shoulder injuries always seem so random to me. Like sometimes you fall down on the turf and you're fine. Nothing. It just, it hurts. And then other times you fall down and your shoulder separates. And there doesn't seem to be any like logic as to when that's going to happen. Like I've seen people playing goalkeeper, right? And they make the same dive that they've made a million times before, only for some reason this time their shoulder pops out when doing it. You're like, what the, like, why can that just randomly happen? And it didn't look bad, right? It's just a fairly routine tackle from behind and then shoulder hitting the turf and boom, grade 3 sprain, done. Right, he's out he's on IR.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look. So next time you watch a game and you see maybe a player that falls on their shoulder and you're wondering if they're going to get hurt, look for two things. One is that arm forced upward?
Yeah.
So is it launched upward? Or two, when they're landed on their shoulder, is there any rolling? Because when you get like a clavicle break or an AC joint separation, a lot of times it's such a direct force down, and the player being tackled doesn't have any room to roll or offload that shoulder, so it has to go somewhere. So those two things I watch.
It's like a square hit into the turf.
Exactly.
Where you don't have anywhere to go.
You don't have anywhere to go. So when I watch film on some of these, it's a relatively easy to diagnose if something happens just based off of those two mechanisms going into the tackle.
And it's usually the AC joint, like the clavicle to the shoulder part that goes when that happens.
Yeah, and I mean, you do see clavicles break.
Sure.
But that's, again, that direct force, but that AC joint is usually that pivot spot for it.
All right, where else do you want to head in terms of injuries?
Well, you watched the game last night, so you got to see Travis Kelce's ankle come out, and he looked pretty good. Dude, the thing's going to be taped up.
The miracles of tape. I've talked about this plenty of times in the podcast. You can tape an ankle solid and you're good to go.
Right. The question is, like, what's going to last longer, his ankle injury or his relationship with Taylor Swift? I think that's the biggest question we have. But he actually looked pretty good, and I was really surprised to see that. We're going to see.
There was one play, right? There was one play where he clearly landed on it, hit it, something got tackled. I forget exactly what happened, but he jumped up, sort of limping. Looked like he might come out of the game, and then was like, "No, I'm good," and kind of hobbled back to the huddle, and then was good to go.
Yeah,
it obviously just like, however he was tackled, they clearly just tweaked it in a way that shot the pain back up through him.
Yeah, one of the reasons I find football so fun to watch sometimes is, and I didn't even know this until later. Kelce, when he originally hurt his ankle, he tried to sneak back into the game. Did you see that? He tried to sneak from the sideline and like go back into the huddle, and they're like, no, get back out. So it's interesting because he's probably going to be, he's slowly going to be getting better with this ankle. You're not going to really see as many issues with it, but I do think that just by even playing yesterday, that's got to be a little swollen, got to be a little bit sore. So that's just going to be something to continue to manage. But like then transitioning from that ankle, you see the likes of Austin Eckler coming back. You see the likes of Saquon Barkley coming back. I think Austin Eckler has a higher potential of playing.
So it looks like he will play. That's a good one to kind of wrap up with, I guess. Eckler looks like he's coming back. He's been out for a while now. Is he likely to look the same as he was when he went out? Like, because he was crushing it earlier in the season.
I think they managed him great. Look at the Chargers with their healthcare team now, just on top, right? But I think they managed him well. I think they gave him appropriate break. A high ankle sprain, there is a high chance of that repercussion happening this season. So they managed him really well. He's had appropriate time. They're waiting until he is 100%. And coach talk all the time says, well, we got to get him to 100, and then they put him at their 80.
Right.
I really do think they're waiting. And it kind of reminds me, like, his injury, I think, kind of went unnoticed a little bit. There wasn't a lot of talk initially. And it reminds me a little bit of Devon Achane, where he went out and you didn't hear really a lot of talk about it. And then next thing you know, he's like, wow, he's dealing with some ankle issues. He's going to be out for a little bit, but there's not worth putting him back at 80%. Right. These two are explosive players that really need that ankle to be stable. And then it just baffles me because then you look on the flip side, and I feel like every single week that Saquon Barkley injures his ankle, they're trying to get him back out there and saying he's questionable. That's just going to keep on happening. I mean, if I'm them, and I'm in the Giants right now with all their injuries on
particularly
offense.
now. Like, what have you got to gain getting them back? You're already screwed.
Yeah, so there's no point in pushing him.
One last guy, actually, just because we hit on the Giants there, Daniel Jones and this neck injury. What is that, and how is he likely to be? They're talking about potentially he could be playing.
Yeah, so last year he had a season-ending neck injury. This year, the initial reports were kind of scary because he said it felt the same way.
Right.
But it's not. Now, when you have like anything like a stinger, and do you probably have?
Not a proper one, no.
So like when you get a stinger, you do get like radiating nerve pain down your arms or arm. And that also can mimic some of the things that you might feel like with a neck injury, right? Which is really scary. Like when you put somebody on a spine board, if like they're laying down there and they say, I have tingling in my arms, boom, spine board on the field.
Right.
And they're not even messing with it. So if he had any similar symptoms, they were really cautious with that, and it didn't turn out to be that at all. I think that what held him out last year is he actually said he was good to come back, and the docs were like, no, I don't think you're ready. This time, I just don't think it was as significant. It's not even going to be, I think, a hindrance to him as long as he doesn't get hit like that again. On the flip side, you look at somebody like Leighton Vander Esch, who hurt his neck again, and this is a guy who's, dropped in the draft because of his neck issues. Those type of like continuing, neck issues, that is way more worrisome. I think that Daniel Jones is just they're going to be cautious with him. I do see him playing if he's fully cleared by the medical team, because I know right now that Daniel Jones says he can go.
If he's in pain and it's a neck injury, like is that feels like something that's going to be problematic for a quarterback who's got a head moving left to right the whole time. Like you can't just whatever about sort of modifying your play if you've got a sore ankle or a sore whatever, right? And there's certain things you can't really do where it's going to be pain. Like if you can't turn your head without it shooting pain through your body, you've got some problems as a quarterback.
Yeah, and I think if it was to the point of where like if he just looked over his shoulder and it was shooting pain, they wouldn't play him. I think if it's like soreness by just like really big range of motions, they can manage it like they manage other injuries and give him some medicine Sunday morning and go after it. So,
all right. So Daniel Jones might actually end up playing after all. All right, that's going to do it for our Boo Boo Breakdown, the injury roundup with Vic Troha here, and that's going to do it for the PFF NFL podcast for this entire week. Thank you all for listening, and Steve and I will be back on Monday.